Prisoner. After suffering continuous mental pain and physical torture for 14 years, Ivan emerged from the Okhotsk prison. But not like a bird that comes out of a hunter's cage, wingless, rather like a lion whose confinement within the cage walls has made it even more ferocious and bloodthirsty. Inside him, a molten flame was raging, whose heat had scorched his strong body, his well-formed limbs, and his vibrant desires. Today, every particle of his existence was a spark hungry, restless, and rebellious. The jailer weighed him. At the time of entry, he had weighed 2 mun and 30 sir, approx. 80 kilograms, but now he weighed only 1 mun and 5 sir, approx. 40 kilogram. The jailer sympathetically said, "You've become very weak, Ivan. If you don't get proper care, it will be bad." Ivan looked at his skeletal frame with a sense of victory and, feeling a fiery flow within himself, replied, "Who says I'm weak?" "You can see for yourself," the jailer said. "The fire in my heart won't extinguish, Mr. Jailer. Ivan won't die for 100 years, believe me." Ivan often spoke in this delirious manner, so the jailer paid little heed. Everyone thought he was half insane. After some formalities, his clothes and books were brought, but now all those suits seemed foreign to him. In the pockets of the coats were several notes and rubles in cash. He gave everything away to the prison guards and lowly employees, as if he had just inherited a kingdom. The jailer said, "That's not allowed, Ivan. You can't bribe government officials." Ivan smiled saintly, "This is not a bribe, Mr. Jailer. What do I have to do with them now, having bribed them? What harm can they do to me by being displeased, and what can they give me by being pleased? This is a gesture of gratitude for their kindnesses, without which even 14 hours here would have been unbearable, let alone 14 years. When he left the prison gate, the jailer and all other staff followed him to the motor car. 15 years ago, Ivan had been the pride of a wealthy and noble family in Moscow. He had received a high education, was skilled in sports, fearless, generous, and kind-hearted. His heart was as clear as a mirror, and he was a paragon of virtue, ready to risk his life to protect the weak, his courage a naked sword in the face of danger. A young woman named Helen, whom all the young men in school adored, studied with him. She was as beautiful as she was sharp, highly imaginative but secretive about her feelings. It's hard to say what she saw in Ivan that drew her to him, for they had nothing in common. Ivan loved travel and drinking, while Helen loved poetry, music, and dance. To Ivan, money existed solely to be spent freely. To Helen, it was to be saved prudently. Ivan saw the lecture hall as a prison, Helen thrived in it. Perhaps it was this very difference that became a natural attraction between them, which eventually blossomed into restless love. Ivan proposed marriage to her, and she accepted. They were planning to marry and spend their honeymoon in some mountainous region when suddenly the political struggle drew them in. Helen had already leaned towards the nationalists. Ivan, too, was swept up in that wave. He was the scion of a noble family, and for him to take the side of the people was a great penance. Whenever he became discouraged in the struggle, Helen would encourage him, and Ivan, moved by her love and devotion, would feel ashamed of his weakness. During this time, a governor named Romanov was appointed to rule the province of Ukraine. He was extremely ruthless and an enemy of the nationalists. He wouldn't rest until he had sent 2 or 4 rebels to jail each day. As soon as he arrived, he charged several editors with sedition and sent them to Siberia, dissolved farmers' assemblies, and dismantled the city municipality. When the people held rallies to express their anger, he ordered the police to fire on the crowds, killing several innocents. Martial law was declared, and the entire city was in uproar. People were afraid to leave their homes because the police would search and beat everyone they encountered. Helen, with a stern expression, said, "This oppression can no longer be tolerated, Ivan. Something must be done." Ivan looked at her with questioning eyes. "What can we do?" Helen, frustrated by his apathy, said, "You ask what we can do? I say we can do everything. I will put an end to him with my own hands." Ivan looked at her in astonishment. "Do you think it's easy to kill him? He never goes out in an open carriage. He always has a group of armed riders with him. Even on the train, he travels in reserved compartments. It seems impossible to me, Helen, absolutely impossible. Helen continued making tea for several minutes. Then, after setting 2 cups on the table, she sipped slowly, lost in thought. Suddenly, she put her cup down, filled her large eyes with resolve, and said, "Despite all this, I can kill him, Ivan. A person can do anything when they risk their life. Do you know what I'll do? I'll win his trust, deceive him into thinking that I love him. No matter how heartless a person is, there's always some hidden tenderness in their heart, like nectar in a flower. I believe Romanov's oppressive policy is just the knot of his frustrated desire. Some enchantress must have disappointed him, and his heart has dried up. I will revive it, and the sweet words and innocent smile of a young woman will work wonders. Men like him can be brought to their knees with the snap of a finger. Wooing a traveler like you is far more difficult. If you believe I'm not unattractive, Ivan, then trust me when I say I will succeed. Tell me, am I beautiful or not?" She glanced at Ivan with playful eyes. Ivan, charmed by her mood, replied, "You are asking me, Helen? I think you're the most beautiful in the world." Helen cut him off. "If you think that, then you're a fool, Ivan. Not in this city, not even in our school are there girls more beautiful than me. Yes, you can say that I'm not ugly. Do you think I consider you the most handsome man in the world? Never. I could name 100 men more handsome than you, but there's something unique in you that I don't see anywhere else. So listen to my plan. It will take me a month to win him over. Then, he will take me for a walk. And one night, we will go to the park and sit on a bench by the pond. You will come with a revolver, and that will be the end of him." As we mentioned earlier, Ivan was a nobleman's son and didn't have a deep love for revolutionary politics. Under Helen's influence, he developed some mental sympathy for the cause, but mental sympathy doesn't lead to real danger. He didn't object outright but replied with some doubt, "Helen, is this really a humane act?" Helen retorted sharply, "If he doesn't behave humanely with others, why should we treat him with humanity? Isn't it as clear as the sun that hundreds of families are being destroyed by this monster? Who knows how many innocent lives are on his hands? Showing leniency towards such a person is inappropriate. I don't understand why you're so cold. When I see his wickedness, my blood boils. I swear, whenever his procession passes by, every fiber of my being trembles with violent impulse. If someone skinned him alive in front of me, I wouldn't feel pity. If you don't have the courage, fine. I'll do it myself. Yes, watch how I send that dog to hell." Helen's face turned red with the fervor of her rage. Ivan, embarrassed, said, No, that's not it, Helen. I didn't mean that I wouldn't support you in this task. I've only just realized how deeply your soul is troubled by the country's plight. But I still have to say, this task isn't as easy as it seems, and we must proceed very cautiously. Helen placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't worry about that, Ivan. When I'm putting the thing most precious to me at stake, do you think I wouldn't act cautiously? But I have one request of you. If I do anything in the meantime that seems wrong to you, will you forgive me?" Ivan looked at Helen's face with bewildered eyes. He didn't understand her intention. Helen feared that Ivan might raise another objection. To reassure him, she brought her lips close to his and said, "In pretending to love him, I'll have to do things that should be yours alone. I fear you might begin to suspect me." Ivan, pulling her into his arms, said, "That's impossible, Helen. Trust is the first step of love." As he spoke the final words, his eyes dropped. He began to wonder whether he would be able to live up to the ideal of generosity in those words. 3 days later, the drama began. Helen went to meet Romanov with a complaint about the baseless suspicions the police had about her, and convinced him that the officers were dissatisfied with her simply because she had rejected their immoral proposals. It was true that during her time at the university, she had been associated with some radical young men, but after leaving the university, she had severed all ties with them. Romanov, though cunning, thought himself to be much cleverer. In his 10 years of service, he had never encountered a woman who trusted him so much and placed herself at his mercy. Like a money-hungry man who suddenly sees a treasure, his judgment became clouded. In his mind, he thought he had learned a lot from Helen about the revolutionaries, things that the secret police hadn't been able to discover despite their hard efforts. But he couldn't see how much of this information was fabricated. In this half-hour meeting, a young woman had intoxicated an experienced officer with the wine of her beauty. As Helen was leaving, Romanov stood up from his chair and said, "I hope this won't be our last meeting." Helen extended her hand and said, "Thank you for listening to my troubles with such kindness, Your Excellency." "Come here tomorrow afternoon for tea," Romanov replied. The meetings became more frequent. Helen would return home and recount everything to Ivan. "Romanov is not as evil as his reputation suggests. No, he's quite a romantic, a lover of music and art, a figure of grace and decorum." In just a few days, Helen became very close to Romanov, and somehow, the police's oppression in the city began to ease. Finally, the appointed day arrived. Ivan and Helen sat together all day, discussing their plans. Ivan's mind was restless today. He would sometimes laugh without reason and then suddenly start crying. Doubts, anticipation, and an unknown fear had made his mind so turbulent that the boat of his thoughts was drifting aimlessly with no sense of direction. Helen, too, was very anxious and serious today. She had already had elegant clothes tailored for this occasion. She was using various means to adorn her beauty, but there was no warrior's enthusiasm in her actions, only the trembling of a coward. Suddenly, Ivan, his eyes filled with tears, said, "Helen, today you've become so enchanting that I don't know why, but I'm afraid of you." Helen smiled, a smile filled with sorrow, and said, "Sometimes, Ivan, a person has to carry out duties that are most unpleasant. Today, I am going to use nectar as poison. Have you ever seen such misuse of beauty?" Ivan, distracted, replied, "This is what they call national life." "This is national life? No, this is hell. But the world will still need this for some time. The sooner this phase ends, the better." The die was cast. Ivan, now inflamed, said, "Should we let the oppressors flourish in this world until their thorns make it impossible to place a foot anywhere on this earth?" Helen didn't reply, but the sorrow building in her mind was apparent on her face. For her, the nation was supreme, and individuals held no value before it. Even if her heart was weakening for some reason, she didn't have the courage to reveal it. The two embraced each other and bid farewell. Who knew if this would be their last meeting? Both their hearts were heavy, and their eyes were moist. Ivan said with excitement, "I will come at the right time." Helen didn't respond. Ivan repeated his request earnestly, "Pray to God for me, Helen." Helen replied with a voice as if choking back tears, "I don't believe in God." "I do," Ivan said. "Since when?" "Since death has stood before my eyes." He hurried away. Evening had fallen, and in just 2 hours, the time for the difficult test, which had his soul trembling, would arrive. He wanted to sit somewhere in solitude and think. Today, he realized that he was not free. Thick chains bound every part of his body. How could he break free of them? It was 10 o'clock. Helen and Romanov were sitting on a bench in a secluded part of the park. A cold, piercing wind was blowing. The moon was hidden behind the clouds, like a faint hope. Helen looked around with anxious eyes and said, "It's getting late now. We should leave." Romanov stretched out his legs on the bench and said, "It's not that late yet, Helen. I can't say whether these moments of life are dreams or reality. But even if they are real, they are sweeter than dreams, and if they are dreams, they are brighter than reality." Helen, restless, stood up and grabbed Romanov's hand, saying, "I feel uneasy today. My head is spinning. Let's go, take me home." Romanov took her hand, pulled her close, and made her sit beside him, saying, "But I've called for the car at 11. Helen gasped, "At 11? "Yes, it's almost 11. Let's talk a bit more until then. The night feels like a black specter. The longer I can keep it away, the better. I feel as if you came to me that day as the goddess of my fortune, Helen. If it weren't for you, who knows what atrocities I would have committed by now." That policy of kindness has created such a positive change in the atmosphere that I'm amazed myself. Months of suppression couldn't achieve what a few days of reassurance have. And for that, I owe it all to you, Helen, only to you. But the unfortunate thing is that our government knows only how to kill, not how to heal. There are already suspicions about me in the Tsar's ministers, and they are considering removing me from here. Suddenly, the blinding flash of a torch illuminated the area like lightning, followed by the sound of a gunshot. At that moment, Romanov leaped and grabbed Ivan, shouting, "Catch him, catch him! Murder! Helen, run from here!" There were several guards in the park. They came running from all directions. Ivan was surrounded. In an instant, battalions of town police, armed police, secret police, and mounted police appeared from nowhere. Ivan was arrested. Romanov shook hands with Helen and said in a suspicious tone, "Isn't this Ivan the same young man who studied with you in school?" Helen, disturbed, replied, "Yes, he is. But I had no idea he had become a revolutionary." Romanov, with relief, said, "The bullet whizzed right past my head." Helen gasped, "Oh, God. I didn't give him a chance to fire a second shot. I feel pity for this young man, Helen. These unfortunate souls think that by committing such murders, they will save the country. If I had died, would someone even more ruthless than me not have taken my place? But I feel no anger, sorrow, or fear, Helen. Don't worry at all. Come, let me take you home." On the way, Romanov kept congratulating himself and thanking God for saving him from the attack, while Helen sat in silence, lost in her thoughts. The next day, the case was brought before the magistrate, and Helen was the government's witness. Ivan realized that his world had gone dark, and he was sinking into its bottomless depths. 14 years later, Ivan stepped off the train and headed straight for Helen's house. He had no thoughts of his family. His parents were on their deathbeds, devastated by his absence, but he did not care. He was consumed by the rage he had nurtured for 14 years and was on his way to confront Helen. However, his anger no longer held the thirst for blood, only a deep, burning resentment. He wanted to extract the essence of the torment he had suffered in those 14 years into a few words and pour that venom into Helen's veins, watching her writhe in agony, satisfying his eyes. And what were those words? "Helen, the treachery you committed against me is perhaps unmatched even in the history of womanhood. I laid everything at your feet. I was nothing more than a slave to your commands. You were the one who incited me to kill Romanov, and then you were the one who testified against me. And why? Merely to satisfy your vile lust. There was no other evidence against me. Romanov and his corrupt police couldn't have defeated me with their false testimonies. But you, to fulfill your perverse desires and enjoy the embrace of Romanov's poisonous arms, betrayed me. Open your eyes and see it's the same Ivan, whom you crushed under your feet, standing before you now to expose all your deceit. You claimed to serve the nation, wanted to sacrifice yourself on the altar of the country. But at the very first temptation of wild desires, you abandoned all your disguises and became a slave to your carnal cravings. At the first morsel of power and wealth, you wagged your tail and pounced upon it. Shame on your lustful desires, shame on your debased life. It was evening. In the west, the sun was setting like a funeral pyre, and preparations were being made to carry Helen's body in a grand procession at Romanov's vast mansion. The city's dignitaries had gathered, and Romanov was decorating the bier with garlands, moistening the flowers with his own tears. At that moment, Ivan, dressed in ragged clothes, weak, hunched over, with long, unkempt hair, and looking like a skeleton, appeared before them. No one paid him any attention, thinking he was just a beggar, the kind that often shows up on such occasions in hopes of charity. When the city's bishop concluded the final rites, and the daughters of Mary had finished singing hymns welcoming her to her new life, Ivan approached the bier. Shaking with rage, he said, "This is the wretched woman whom even the blessings of the world's purest souls cannot save from the torments of hell. She deserves nothing more than for her corpse to." Several people rushed forward and grabbed him, pushing him toward the gate. At that moment, Romanov came over, placed his hand on Ivan's shoulder, and took him aside, asking, "Friend, is your name Claudius Ivanov?" "Yes, it is you. I remember your face now. I know everything, every detail." Helen never hid anything from me. Now that she is no longer in this world, I cannot lie to serve her. You may strike her with harsh words or blow after blow. She will remain equally calm. But until the very end, she remembered you. The memory of that incident haunted her and often made her cry. The greatest wish of her life was to kneel before you and beg for your forgiveness. As she lay dying, she made it her last will that I somehow deliver this plea to you, that she was guilty of wronging you and wanted your forgiveness. Do you think that if she had come before you, with tears in her eyes, your heart would not have melted, even if it were made of stone? Even now, don't you see her standing before you as a humble supplicant? Go and look at her smiling face. Monsieur Ivan, your heart will long to kiss her once more. I won't feel any jealousy at all. Lying there on that bed of flowers, she looks like the queen of flowers herself. Ivan, her only unfulfilled desire in life was your forgiveness. A loving heart is very generous, Ivan. It's an ocean of mercy and compassion. Jealousy and pride flow into it like dirty streams, but they only make it more vast and pure. You cannot ignore the final wish of the one you once loved. Romanov took Ivan's hand and led him to the bier, where hundreds of curious eyes watched as the coffin's lid was removed, revealing Helen's peaceful face. Death had granted her an almost divine serenity, as if all the splendor of heaven was welcoming her. A divine light seemed to flash in Ivan's cruel eyes as he recalled the moment when he had embraced Helen in love and entwined all his emotions and joy into flowers he had placed around her neck. He felt as though everything happening before him was a dream, and suddenly, his eyes opened, and he was once again holding Helen close to his chest. For one moment of that bliss, wouldn't he endure another 14 years of imprisonment? Were not the happiest moments of his life the ones spent with Helen, and hadn't he failed to forget the unparalleled joy of those moments in these 14 years? He sat by the coffin and, with a trembling voice full of reverence, prayed, "God, please take my dearest Helen into the shelter of your forgiveness." When he lifted the coffin onto his shoulders to carry it, his soul was ashamed of its narrowness, its restlessness, its baseness. And when the coffin was lowered into the grave, he sat there for an unknown amount of time, weeping. The next day, when Romanov came to offer prayers for the dead, he saw Ivan with his head bowed in prostration, and his soul had already departed for heaven.